Thank you, all of you, for joining us for this final new member reading on Zoom. It's been a wonderful series of readings, and we'll start right away with Dan Goodgame. Dan Goodgame is editor-in-chief of Texas Monthly, overseeing the 40 journalists who produced the prize-winning 46-year-old magazine and its website, live events, and podcast. A Pulitzer Prize finalist and best-selling author, Dan was editor-in-chief of Fortune Small Business and worked for Time as White House correspondent, Washington bureau chief, and assistant managing editor, as well as at the Miami Herald as a correspondent in the Middle East. He co-authored Marching in Place, a book about George H.W. Bush. Dan was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University, where he earned his Master's of Philosophy. Dan, welcome.
Out, but he was an avid reader and an admirer of good writing. So I'd like to honor him today by reading the eulogy that I read at his graveside in my hometown in Mississippi some years back. So here goes. My dad and I loved to fish and hunt and play golf together. But after I moved away from home, we found a new shared pleasure. We would read the same book at the same time and talk about it on the phone as we went. A few months ago, when his cancer made it impossible for him to read anymore, I started reading aloud to him. The last book I read to him was Tom Brokaw's The Greatest Generation, about the cohort of men and women who grew up during the Great Depression, who fought and won World War II, and who built the country we've been blessed to inherit. One of the statistics in the book that just knocked me over was that we're now losing each day, on average, 1,000 men and women from that generation. Just think of that. In 1,000 graveyards around the country today, people are gathered as we are here to say goodbye to a member of that generation who lived a rich life and accomplished great things for himself, herself, and the rest of us. My dad was at once typical of that generation and one of a kind. He was born in Birmingham, Alabama in 1926, the son of a machinist. He watched at age 10 as his dad left the family and moved far away during the depths of the Depression. My dad, my Aunt Bess, and their sainted mother took in boarders and fed them and washed and ironed and patched their clothes and grew vegetables in what was once their backyard and worked whatever odd jobs they could find to get by. And then, less than a year after Pearl Harbor, Dad dropped out of high school to join the fight. He lied about his age to enter the Navy at 16 and had to eat 10 pounds of bananas to make the minimum weight limit. He saw combat in every major theater, from North Africa to Italy to Normandy to Okinawa, where the destroyer on which he served was almost cut in half by kamikaze planes, and everyone abandoned ship into shark-infested waters. He was wounded by shrapnel, and many of his friends were killed, one of them while he and Dad were shoulder to shoulder manning an anti-aircraft gun. That was a detail he never told me until just last year when we were driving through Meriden, Connecticut to see one of his grandsons play in a soccer match. Dad mentioned almost in a whisper that it was his lost comrade's hometown, the town whose name Dad recalled scrawling onto an envelope addressed to the young man's parents. When Dad returned from the war, he worked for a while in the steel mill in his native Birmingham. But the unions there went on strike, so he and my mom got by any way they could, mowing lawns and raising bird dogs for wealthy folks, poaching deer and quail, running trot lines for catfish in the Warrior River, pulling wild watercress out of ponds. Dad even moved to Louisiana for a while to run a bulldozer on the Atchafalaya Spillway project, where he learned to tell jokes and country stories in a hilarious Cajun accent. But that job too petered out. And then he had to take the hardest job of all, working for his father in the machine shop at the shipyard here in Pascagoula. Some of you here work for both my dad and my granddad. You know that it wasn't easy to work for either one of them. And my uncles and I can tell you it wasn't easy to be a son to either one of them. My Uncle Bob once explained to me that when you're a machinist like Dad or Granddad and you work all day in tolerances of 1/1000th of an inch, it's hard to accept a B on a report card or to see the lawn mowed and raked but not edged. One time when I was in high school, I remember my dad was bearing down on me on several fronts with his trademark focus and perseverance. And I finally told him in an angrier tone than I'd ever used with him that he was being too damned hard on me, that I made better grades and did more chores and played on more sports teams than any of my friends, and he just needed to lighten up. I thought he was going to hit me, but instead he got very quiet. He told me if I were the father of most of your friends, I would lighten up. I've studied them, and I've studied you. I know what you're capable of, and I know you're not living up to your talents and opportunities. Now, those of you who worked with Dad have told me some vivid stories about him over the years, and particularly recently in the days since he died. And one of the themes of those stories is the great gift that he had for telling exactly how much excellence he could get out of each individual and exactly how to coach and cajole them into delivering it, even at the end of his career when he was superintendent of 700 shipyard machinists. He didn't ask an ounce more than anyone could give, and he wouldn't accept an ounce less. That, I think, is Dad's legacy to many of us here today. He made us stretch. We're better than we would have been if he had not been part of our lives. At the same time that Dad and I were reading The Greatest Generation, we each saw the movie Saving Private Ryan. It was a hard movie for him to watch. It brought back the horror of what he had seen at Normandy. When he was a 17-year-old kid, German shells were slamming into his ship. Landing craft were returning from Omaha Beach, piled high with the dead and wounded. And Dad's job was to haul those men up the side and into the galley. Those of you who've seen the movie will remember the climactic scene where Tom Hanks' character is dying of his wounds, having saved Private Ryan. And he looks at Ryan and he says, "Earn this." That's all he said, "Earn this." And what he meant, of course, was that Ryan should live the kind of life that would be worthy of the sacrifices that were made for him and the opportunities that were created for him. And I've thought of that scene a lot in the last few days. And I know I've got my work cut out for me because I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn the great gift of having Charlie Goodgame as my father. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a beautiful, moving tribute to your father. And I had to tell you, I am like this with your father in terms of how I raised my two boys. You know, that those values are just so important. And you know, I think I would be very simpatico with your father. They would call me the toughest father on the Upper West Side. But I know what your father's talking about. And you know, that bedrock value and what makes really this country, and a lot of immigrants, I think, certainly have that mentality. Thank you. That was beautiful. Okay. Anything else? Just that? Okay. So next up, Andrew Graybill is the director of the William P. Clements Center for Southwest Studies at Southern Methodist University. A historian of the North American West, Andrew has authored or edited 4 books, including The Civil War Era in the American West, The Red and the White, A Family Saga of the American West, and Policing the Great Plains, Rangers, Mounties, and the North American Frontier, 1875 to 1910. He has also published articles in the American Scholar, the New York Times, Texas Monthly, and the Wall Street Journal. Andrew?
Thanks, Sergio. And as a son and a father, Dan, that was extremely moving and not easy to follow. I'm wishing that my name came before yours in the alphabet. That was lovely. Sergio, thanks a lot for inviting me. Thank you all very much for showing up. It's incredibly kind of you to spend a little time. If it's as nice where any of you are as it is here in Dallas, my wife was joking about this. She said, "Who is possibly going to come in and listen to you on a day like this?" Well, I salute you souls for having done so. And I also beg your forgiveness for reading something that's about Montana rather than Texas. I just thought that this was sort of the kind of the right length and maybe the right material for this sort of occasion. It's from my second book, The Red and the White, which is the history of a Montana family of mixed native white ancestry, with particular interest in what happens to those to the children of a white fur trader and his Blackfoot wife, what happens to their mixed race children as the farthest reaches of the West get absorbed by the United States in the late 19th century. And this passage, I know I'm sort of, I should probably withhold the reveal, as they say, but so you can follow the action. This passage describes the murder of Malcolm Clark, who's the fur trader, sort of paterfamilias, who was killed at his ranch in 1869 by his wife's cousin, a Pecan Indian named Netooshio, whom the whites called Pete Owlchild. Whatever the cause of the enmity between Netooshio and the Clarks, Owlchild's embrace of Horace on that summer night in 1869 suggested that all ill feelings had passed. Nellie joked lightly, "Our horses are again stolen," and Malcolm invited his guests inside for a hastily prepared supper. The young men accepted and they filed indoors. Netooshio, along with Bear Chief, whom Nellie called Richard III because of his resemblance, supposedly, to the 15th century English king, Black Weasel, known also as Shanghai, his brother, and one of Mountain Chief's sons. They said they had come to deliver some stolen horses and also to entice Clark to come and trade with the Pegans later that year at one of their winter camps. Though Clark was reassured by the Indians' apparent goodwill, the mood at the dinner table was not only odd, but even portentous. Nellie's 8-year-old sister, Isabel, told Owlchild how hard her family had taken the news of the murder of Mountain Chief's brother at Fort Benton, but Netooshio hushed her as if he did not want sympathy, even if offered by a little girl. Meanwhile, Black Weasel sat silently through the meal with his face buried in his hands and tears welling out from between his fingers. When Owlchild explained away the bizarre sight by insisting that his friend's eyes were simply sore, Isabel sent for some water to relieve the Indian's discomfort. Strangest of all was the erratic behavior of Mountain Chief's son, who paced about the house nervously, running his palms over the furniture, fingering the tablecloth, and talking incessantly in an animated voice. Horace must have sensed that something was amiss because he searched for his pistol before accompanying Mountain Chief's son out to bring in the horses from a nearby pasture. Perplexed by her brother's alarm, Nellie chided him gently. "What's the use of a firearm? You're with a friend." Malcolm agreed, and so Horace and the Indian headed out into the darkness. They traveled about a mile from the house when Horace was startled to hear his companion begin singing a crow death song. He turned to face the Indian, who fired a pistol, the ball striking just below Horace's nose, passing through his face and exiting slightly in front of his left ear. Though thrown from his saddle but ensnared in the lariat, Horace was dragged across the ground for some distance before his leg slipped loose of its hold, and then he lay still, bleeding uncontrollably from his wound. 2 more Indians, who were not part of the group received at the house, emerged from a patch of nearby brush, and upon inspecting Horace, guessed that he was dead. Because of Owlchild's kinship ties to the victim, they did not desecrate the body by taking its scalp, and instead they hurried back to the ranch. Though weakened from the loss of blood, Horace managed to drag himself to within a couple hundred yards of the house, where he collapsed and cried out, "Father, I'm shot." But he heard only the whinnying of horses and the shrieks of his mother and sisters. Moments before, Owlchild and Malcolm stepped outside to talk, and when the 2 men appeared at the door, yet another Indian, there may have been as many as 30 concealed at various spots on the ranch, bolted from the darkness and shot Clark in the chest at point-blank range. As the rancher staggered backward, Owlchild delivered the death blow, powerfully cleaving Clark's forehead with an axe. Netooshio had planned his attack carefully, counting on Indian rage over the recent atrocity at Fort Benton to shield him from any tribal punishment. The commotion was so fierce and the screams so feral that they spooked the Indians' horses. In the confusion, Nellie, her mother, and an elderly aunt named Black Bear were able to pull Malcolm's body into one of the bedrooms without drawing the notice of the Indians. The women placed the corpse next to Horace, who had staggered inside moments earlier and whose wound Nellie packed with raw tobacco in a frantic effort to stanch the bleeding. While Nellie, Kuthkakona, and the rest of the family took shelter behind barred doors, Black Bear went out to confront the attackers. The old woman admonished the Indians, telling them, "The man murdered tonight was your best friend. You've committed a deed so dark, so terrible, that the trees will whisper it." Then Netooshio insisted to the others that Horace was still alive. His companions were moved by Black Bear's reproach, and so the raiders left, driving off the Clark's cattle and destroying their stores of flour, sugar, and other goods. With the Indians' departure, an eerie calm settled upon the ranch. The women clung to each other in total darkness, afraid to light a candle, lest any one of the Indians return and finish off the survivors. Marvelous stillness covered the house, broken only by the whimpering of the children and the discomforting sound of Horace vomiting up the blood that he had swallowed. All the while, Helen's mind reeled at the thought that the Pegans, our blood, as she called them, could be guilty of such a deed. At daybreak, she and Isabel hurried off to seek help, and by late that afternoon, several well-wishers had trickled in, including a physician who announced that miraculously, Horace had suffered no broken bones and would likely make a full recovery. But Nellie's relief was tempered by the arrival of her younger brother, Nathan, who had been away from the ranch for several days in search of some missing horses. Upon entering the house, he passed by the prostrate Horace without saying a word, and he approached his father's corpse. Nathan, whom Nellie described as hot-headed, let out a deep groan, and his youthful face took on a dark and worrisome expression as he vowed retribution. He was just 17. Word of Clark's murder sent shockwaves throughout Montana, and in short order, the news ricocheted well beyond the territory. Nathaniel Langford, a close friend and later the first superintendent of Yellowstone National Park, wrote, "The Indians loved him, and it was a common saying among the citizens of Helena, where I lived, that Malcolm Clark was more a friend to the Indians than to the whites. And when the news that he was killed reached us, it was thought that a general uprising would surely follow." Within a few days, Clark's sister Charlotte received a telegraph at her home in St. Paul. She carried the dispatch upstairs to her mother, who was visiting from Cincinnati. When she read it, the elderly woman broke down, sobbing, "My bright-eyed little boy, who loved his only mother, as he used to call me, so tenderly." 2 days after the butchery, Malcolm Clark was buried in the afternoon of August 19, 1869, on a small rise near his ranch house, mourned by numerous friends and admirers. His final resting place was a quiet and peaceful spot, described eloquently by his daughter Helen. Afar off could be seen the rugged crags of the Bear's Tooth, at the base of which the great river runs, and under its shadow, so much of joy, so much of sorrow had met and mingled together and wrought so strange a chapter in his life. But of course, the beauty of the gravesite belied the great violence that had swirled all around it. The murder of its occupant, of course, but in a wider sense, the decades of struggle between and among natives and newcomers for control of the land and its resources. The modest cemetery had a most unexpected visitor 8 years later, after the property had passed out of the Clark's hands. In the summer of 1877, General William T. Sherman, whose marauding exploits in Georgia during the Civil War earned him a reputation far more savage than Malcolm Clark's, made a tour of the Army forts of the West. He spent much of his trip in Montana, where the Nez Perce War, the final episode in the territory's vicious struggle between Indians and whites, was entering its climactic stage. Traveling north from Helena on his visit, General Sherman stopped to rest at a quiet ranch in the Prickly Pear Valley. After a meal, he took a walk around the property, and in his wanderings, he came across an unmarked grave, which he asked about when he returned to the house. Upon learning that in it lay the body of Malcolm Clark, the general became pensive. He then explained to his host that the dead man had been a classmate of his at West Point, and that many times during the Civil War, he had looked through newspapers and military reports, expecting to find mention of his old friend, probably for some gallant act. The trail had gone cold until Sherman's chance discovery in the fastness of the Rocky Mountains. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks.
That was wonderful. I'm going to pick up the red and the white. That's the first thing I'm going to do.
I'm afraid I've told you, I've already read to you its most dramatic part, but I'd like to think that the story as the whole has got at least some other compelling bits here and there.
Thank you. So finally, Regina Taylor is the Denzel Washington Endowed Chair in Theater at Fordham University at Lincoln Center. Her credits as a playwright include Obladi, recipient of the American Theater Critics Association New Play Award, Drowning Crow, the Trinity River Plays, recipient of the Edgerton Foundation New American Play Award, Magnolia, A Night in Tunisia, Escape from Paradise, and Inside the Belly of the Beast. She has also won a Golden Globe Award for Best Performance as an Actress, 3 NAACP Image Awards, and 2 Emmy Award nominations. Regina is currently writing a screenplay about Sojourner Truth. Welcome, Regina.
Thank you. Again, I'm so honored to be in this company, and I want to thank Dan and Andrew for your reading today. Very moving. and very enlightening. I'm reading from a piece that I've been working on called Resistance. It's a series of monologues about issues of the day. This piece I'm about to read is called Deja Vu. It's about a 110-year-old woman who's seen a lot. Her name is Pearl. Is that how it went? Is that how it goes? Is that how it's going? I could have sworn this feeling. What's it called? I remember it like it was yesterday. You ever get that feeling that you've been here before? Is that how it went? Is that how it goes? Is that how it's going? Well, what's it called? A deja vu. Yes. It's like my little great-great-granddaughter, Aurelia. She's only 21 years old and walking around in her dashiki and fro and talking about organizing people to vote like she invented it. Then she turns around talking about since her guy didn't win the primary, since Sanders didn't win again. So she wasn't gonna vote at all. I remember when we couldn't vote. I must be, let's see, 101 or 99 and a half, doesn't matter. I feel young, feel like I can't be more than 49 or 33, at least how I feel inside. No need to go through any of that again. It's just that I still feel there's hope. I never thought I'd ever live to see an African American president. 2008, the promise and hope of change. 2008 or 2009, President Obama and his wife. The way they danced to Etta James at last. But that wasn't Etta. But she looked like Etta. It did remind me of when we got our first Irish Catholic president, John F. Kennedy. I still have his picture on the wall next to Jesus and Martin Luther King Jr. Got Obama up there now, too. And when Barack and Michelle, in her sea green suit, they walked down the avenue, I closed my eyes because I remember that time in Dallas, Texas, riding in that convertible, Jackie and John F. Kennedy. I said, no, 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 not again, but no. The Obamas kept right on walking. Yes. Kennedy, equal rights. Speaking of 45. Hillary Rodham Clinton. Did you ever think it was possible? 1972, I voted for Shirley Chisholm to be the first female and Black president. And now, come November, I will step up to that voting booth, like for the very first time. But everything is so different now, or is it? This feeling that I'm having, what's it called? Deja vu, yes, yes, yes. Remember it like it was yesterday. Don't forget a thing. That first time when I put on my Sunday dress, hat, and gloves and went down to that courthouse to register to vote, you had to take a test. If you passed the test, you paid your money and you could vote. I studied for a year, the Constitution backwards and forwards, saved up my change. And when I got there, the man asked me how many marbles were in this big old jar. Told me if I came back again, there would be hell to pay. Mississippi, 1959. But I came back 38 years old. When I finally got registered, I came back on the rolling tides of change through the fire hoses, dogs, the bombs. I was a freedom rider on the bus from Selma, Alabama, on around to Georgia to Mississippi. Goddamn, how I lost my sight in my left eye that summer, 1964. Yes, Freedom Summer. I sat on that bus next to James Earl Chaney, such a nice, sweet-faced young man. That summer when Michael Henry Schwerner, Andrew Goodman, and James Earl were killed. The flood waters broke, and I waded through that water, through the blood on the streets, kept walking right up to that booth and voted. Never mind whoever was watching. And after I got off that bus walking back home, them whomever snatched me up and beat me till I couldn't remember my own name, can't see out of my left eye to this day. And I haven't missed an election since, because I knew that change was coming, and I knew that I could make a difference. I fought for this right, the right of voting for my children, my children's children, my great-great-grandchild, Aurelia. I knew that we would keep on marching forward. I've walked 2 husbands to the grave. I've had children, grandchildren pass before me. 3 were killed on the street, 2 were killed by Negroes, and 1 by police. Black Lives Matter. The citizens of the 60s. This football player kneeling for the national anthem. Oh, the outrage, like Cassius, no, Muhammad Ali. The men at the Olympics wearing their gold medals and froze with raised fists, head bowed. Yes, the bombings in the church of Birmingham, the shootings in the church in Charleston, what I've seen. The pandemic of 1918. Dogs sicked on the Native Americans in Dakota, trying to save our water, the water in Flint, Michigan, where the air that surrounds smells familiar. Strange fruit, the smell of another sweet-faced young man laying on the ground, dead for hours, years after John Blount's body. Michael Brown in Ferguson. George Floyd in Minnesota. Wallace, Goldwater, today's alt-right Nazis. The chewing away of the Voting Rights Act, saying we don't need it anymore. It's not like somebody might get killed going to the voting booth in these times, is it? What today is, do we dare go to the voting booth at all? This feeling. Time is funny. It moves forward and sideways and bends back over and around again and again. And so here we are again, making America great again all these years. What difference have I made? An open palm, a closed fist, gestures that hold so many possibilities. I'll walk into that booth and place my hand down on my choices. My great-granddaughter says voting has no actual weight or meaning, an illusion. These choices are a trick to keep us quiet. As on the other side of the curtain, people keep the status quo of the same old thing. She believes that it's all rigged. She believes that no matter what new movement we create, it always will be subverted into the establishment. She says to look at every revolutionary from 50 years ago. If they ain't dead, they are in a suit and tie, swallowed by corporations who fund these revolutionary gestures. And so I refuse to. She says, no. No, I tell her. She is too young to be so cynical. I look at her clenched, 110-year-old face. And I just want to cry. And so, I put on my Sunday best. I know how far I've walked to get to commit the act of. I have this feeling. What's it called? Deja vu? No, that's not the word I'm looking for at all. It's called endurance. Yes, weathering through the cycles. An action can make a difference. How that one grain of sand can break the back. After everything I've been through, what else can I believe? What changes if I don't? What changes inside myself if I don't keep trying? No, I don't know that feeling of giving up. Don't want to know. Yes. 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 Thank you.
Wow, that was just phenomenal. And I'm really glad that I'm recording it so many other people can enjoy it. Thank you, Regina.
Thank you.
That was, and so appropriate for right now. You know, how we have to just keep at it. So thank you.
Thank you.
That was wonderful.
Thank you.
So before I stop recording, I simply wanted to congratulate all of our new members, and especially the 3 that read today. Such great readings. We have a wonderful organization, and you just see the quality of the work in so many ways. I've been thrilled to, to help them, give them a platform, and to have other people enjoy their work in vivo, so to speak. So thank you again. I'm about to turn off this recording, and then we can keep chatting if people want to stay for a few minutes after that. Thank you. Okay, recording's off.